will have a call for one question, and we would like to invite you all to join us. Please submit your answer. We would like to hear your thoughts on that discussion point. At the very end of the webinar, we will have survey questions. Please give us your feedback. For some of us that would like to receive the certificate, kindly help us to complete the survey question. For the access to the link of the webinar, it will be sent to your email address, and it will be available up to 6 months after the live date. So for today, for the part 4 of the webinar, the last part of this webinar series, biosecurity, keep your chicks and people safe. We are really delighted to have again Dr. Ron Mayhoff joining us. He will share with us his thoughts and experiences on this topic. Ron is a well-known expert on poultry production, specialized in broiler production, reproduction, and incubation. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Ron Mayhoff.
Welcome everybody to this 4th webinar on biosecurity, how to keep your chicks and your people safe. And then not talking from a veterinarian point of view, but more from a zootechnical point of view. I'm not a veterinarian, I'm a zootechnical engineer, and that sometimes gives a little bit of a different perspective. Nowadays, there's no secret that COVID-19 has affected our business a lot. You see that poultry production has suffered a lot from the COVID-19 situation. Prices have dropped, supply not everywhere at the same level, but you see that there's a disruption of supply and demand, how to get the product to where it's needed, where are our partners, can they survive, where are our markets, can they survive, are the restaurants still buying our product, and so on and so on. Not only that, but also within our organizations, we are dealing with labor availability, people that cannot come to work because they are perhaps infected, or perhaps somebody in their family is infected or has a risk of being infected, and so on and so on. And I think everybody knows that it has affected our business in a very negative way. But I must say it also teaches us some things. It has taught us also where are our weak points, where are our strong points, where do we fail, how do we deal with threats in our hatchery. And if something like this happens, not specifically COVID-19, but in general, do we have a plan B? Do we have an alternative? If we do not have a plan B, if we do not have good protocols that help us, perhaps this is a good moment to get them designed. Not because of COVID-19, because hopefully next year we don't have a problem with that anymore, but also in situations where we are facing Newcastle or avian influenza or salmonella. So what I'm trying to say is that when we have a crisis like COVID-19, do not waste it, but make use of it, as already Winston Churchill said, but I guess not about chickens. So never waste a good crisis. Now, if you look at hatcheries, of course, one thing what you see in hatcheries, they are labor intensive. The setting of the eggs, the transfer, the chick takeoff, dispatch, and so on, the cleaning, etc. takes a lot of labor. And it requires strict planning. It requires strict control. Everything should work. During the working period, but also, for instance, for cleaning and preparation. And I think that's where a lot of people do not work in hatcheries sometimes do not realize what really the effort is that we are having inside the hatchery. The big headache of a hatchery manager might be chick quality, might be what is my hatching percentage of yesterday, but probably it will be more in a matter of, do my people show up, and is my truck working, and is my transfer machine working and operating, because if not, I'm up to my knees into chicks or in eggs. If you have 500,000 chicks a day, you better make sure that the process keeps going. It's like a processing plant. If something stops, the whole process stops. And at the end of the day, you have a lot of chicks to hatch and you have a lot of chicks to process. So you want to make sure that you are able to run that process. And that's probably the biggest issue that we are having. So how do you ensure that that process keeps going? And not only when everything goes as expected, because then it's easy and everybody can do the job, but especially when we have problems arriving. What do we do when plan A fails and we need a plan B? Because when the problem is there, you cannot prevent all the problems, you cannot foresee all the problems happening, but you want to make sure that when the most common problems are happening, that you try as much as you can to have an answer, that you don't start running around at that moment in time, but you already have an idea how to solve it. So you want to have standard operating procedures for those kind of things. In COVID times, of course, if the government or if the health institutes or whatever demand you with reason, how do you separate the people? How do you get the people to and from the hatchery with your transportation? How do you make them shower in and out and so on, and move into the hatchery? It's a lot of effort to make it work, but of course you can, if you are creative, you can get it organized. Because if you cannot get it organized, then the moment something goes wrong, you are in deep trouble. So if people can't work for whatever reason, not at that moment in time, do you have a work pool for people that can do another job than what they are supposed to do? Can they do transfer where they're supposed to do cleaning? Do you have enough automation, for instance, in place? Are you dependent or independent enough from your labor source for your feeling? But also, if you do have automation in place, are you able to ensure that the systems of automations are working? Because if a chick counter doesn't work and your hatcheries are producing again 500,000 chicks a day, that's a lot of chicks to count. So make sure that it works. In COVID times, but also in non-COVID times, and hopefully that will not be too far away. So you need standard operating procedures for more, let's say, everyday threats. For everyday business, for every business, but also, especially also for hatcheries, because they are labor intensive. It's like you can compare it with a processing plant. They are labor intensive and the flow should go. You cannot stop the process. You cannot stop the process, at least not too long. If those eggs are set, you need those chicks to hatch. You need those chicks to process. If that doesn't work, at the end of the day, you do not have the birds to place in the field, and at the end of the line, end of the chain, your processing lines are empty, and that's not what you want. So, standard operating procedures for everyday threats. And let's take Salmonella as an example. You can have it for every type of threat, but let's take in this particular case Salmonella, because that's where we have unfortunately, we have a lot of experience with. And of course, in that case, hatcheries are a crossroad, because hatcheries are a junction where the breeder flocks, the eggs are coming in, and of course the broilers are going out, and everything is basically coming into that hatchery. And the moment you have a breeder flock, in this particular case being positive for Salmonella, but it could have been, for instance, also in an AI situation or Newcastle situation, you can fill in whatever you want, or even a COVID situation, but a hatchery is a heaven for, in case of Salmonella, for cross-contamination. So you have one breeder flock being positive or being suspected to be positive, and all of a sudden you find yourself with a lot of broilers that are positive. So step one, of course, make sure that when you are able to do it, stop your eggs from the breeder flock coming in, or stop them coming in being uncontrolled. That basically means that you have to monitor the breeder flocks, and then you come into simple things like, okay, how often do your testing interval? If you test your breeder flocks every 3 months, then the chance that they become positive and the eggs are coming in and you find out because your customers are start to complain is pretty big. If you do it every 2 weeks, you perhaps have a chance to stop those eggs or take dedicated action before you transfer them to the hatches and they start spreading the salmonella. So ensure your problems are identified as early as possible. That's really, really step one. Make sure that you think about when do I have what problem being identified. Is it early enough? Is it early enough to label my eggs in the hatchery to know what to do with it? In case of eggs, in case of chicks, in case of other situations also. Of course, our world is not perfect, so sometimes we cannot stop it, we cannot prevent it, or we have to use the eggs anyway because you cannot throw them away and you don't want to sell them to your neighbors. So if you have them into your hatchery, how do you prevent the problem there to multiply? And that's where I basically want to focus on today. How do you prevent a problem to multiply inside of your hatchery? And the way to do it is by analyzing the critical control points and controlling them. Make sure that you get a hold, that you get a grip on the risk points. Monitor them, control them. And what do you call a risk point? Well, if you have a salmonella positive flock, what would be a risk point? Well, for instance, if you have floor eggs, if you have potential bangers, they can multiply very, very easily in the hatches. Like cocks in America have shown that you need only one salmonella positive banger to contaminate a whole hatcher. So it really can go very, very, very quickly. But also chick transports. Are your baskets cleaned? Are you controlled? Where your chicks are coming, your baskets are coming back to your hatchery to be filled again. Is your equipment contaminated? Can you control it? How should you control it? Where should you control it? Do you control it when the lab says, by the way, you have a positive flock? Or do you control it as if every flock is already positive? And I think that's the right approach. Make basic everyday principle and apply them every day as if there is a problem. Don't make it complicated, but as long as you don't know if a flock is negative, consider it to be at least a danger, a risk area. So think in worst case scenarios. I don't say that you have to be very, very careful with every step that you do, but what I do try to implement is make a scenario where if something goes wrong, you not automatically have a lot of problem. And the first, and for me the most important step, is you have to separate your hatchery in dirty and clean areas. And I do not mean dirty in the case of, there's a lot of mud all over the floor, and clean, we scrub it every day. But I mean dirty in the sense of you do not have 100% control over the status. You cannot be 100% sure that there is no risk. So dirty means a risk area where you do not have 100% control. And clean means you have control, you have 100%, well that's a lot. So reality is that you try to get as close to 100% as possible. 100% will not be always there, but at least you have control over that area. That's how you separate your hatchery, how you prevent cross-contamination. First of all, make sure that you know where the risks are. That's your hazard approach. And you have to think in terms of cross-contamination. If that egg comes in positive, if that breed, the flock comes in positive, it will be positive, it will come in, it will go to your process, but how do you avoid it from multiplying? How do you avoid the contamination from multiplying? And that's where the basic principles, next to normal standard hygiene practices, have to come in. So separate your dirty from your clean areas, identify them. So separate your risk areas from your control areas and create a controlled flow from clean to dirty to avoid that cross-contamination, like you do in a processing plant. And then we talk about eggs, we talk about trays and trolleys and crates, we talk about waste, we talk about people, and we also talk about air. Those are the 5 things that we need to identify, that we need to control and prevent that cross-contamination, prevent the return flows. So identify risk groups and treat them to get that control. Now this sounds all very theoretical, and of course it is, but it is the baseline for how do you approach a process. How do you approach a process? What do I mean? How do I make it practical? Let's look at the farm producing the eggs into the truck, into the storage of the hatchery, into the setter. Now, for sure, you want to have the eggs in your setter in a controlled situation. You want to make sure that everything that you've done your utmost best, that nothing comes into that setter that you do not want to have there, because that's where the temperature goes up, that's basically where the risk is there. At the same time, of course, when you have 20 or 100 farms and all the eggs, or even farms without of your integration, you cannot have 100% control over all your farms. You do not know if all the farms are doing exactly what you think they should do. Especially when you have farms outside of your integration, but also inside of your integration. Everybody who visits breeder farms knows well enough that yes, the procedures are there, yes, there's a piece of paper on the wall that tells everybody what to do, but sometimes it's not done that way. That means you do not have 100% control, and that means that your farm shouldn't be considered dirty. Not that they are dirty, but it means that they are not 100% under control. So, if you have your farm being dirty, and you want your setter to receive clean eggs, somewhere you have to change the chain from dirty into clean. And probably what you do is do it by disinfection. So you get your eggs from the farm, you disinfect them on the farm, and then you put them in the truck, and you bring them to the storage at the hatchery, and you bring them in the setter. Well, sounds very logical, but is it really the control that you think you should have? If that's the control that you think you should have, which is sufficient, fine with me. But I want you to think in terms, is it giving me the control that I want? Now, first of all, we assume that the disinfection on the farm is done correct. Step 1, that the farm does it the way it's supposed to be done. Okay, now that's already a step. But okay, let's suppose that they do it the way it should be done. Then the eggs are coming into the truck clean. Now, the truck driver brings the eggs to the storage. Do you have full control over what happens during the transportation? Yeah, of course, because we load the truck and the truck drives straight to the hatchery. So he doesn't pick up eggs from another farm. Yeah, he does. So do we have full control over that farm? Perhaps, not necessarily. Where does he have lunch? Oh, well, he has a nice friend with a parrot somewhere, and he basically drinks coffee there, or whatever he does. It basically means that when the eggs are arriving at the storage, you hope that they are still clean. But in that storage, you expect those eggs to stay like that. Yes, but you know as well as everybody that when you are having your eggs in the storage, people are running in and out, you have second grade eggs, you have pellets coming in, you have materials being delivered. So at the end of the day, you have to wonder if my storage is keeping my eggs as clean as I want them to have at the setter. If you are happy with how it's done, there is no problem, it's your choice. The only thing what I want to do is make sure that you think about how do you do it. But I think in reality it basically means that from the farm until the storage, you have a limited control. If the truck driver comes in, he's not supposed to be in the storage room, into the hatchery, because he has been on all those farms and you don't want to have them in. But of course, if he is a fan of Barcelona, and Barcelona Football Club played yesterday against Manchester United, and the guy in the storage room that's setting the eggs is a fan of Manchester United, on Monday morning they had a match, and for sure the guy will walk in and tell the guy that he won or he lost, whatever. So what I'm trying to say is the way you expect people to behave is not always necessarily the way it's done. If you accept that, no problem. If you think that that risk is limited, no problem, it's your choice, but make sure that you have that control, that you even already think about it. So for me, what I would at least do is put a disinfection between your truck and your storage. But again, then you still have the situation where the truck drivers or the second grade eggs and the packing materials, etc., are coming into your storage. And that also there means that perhaps you do not have the full control that you think. So another option would be to put your disinfection between the storage and the setter. That means that in your hatchery, you consider the storage room to be a dirty room. A room where you do not have full control, but after the disinfection between storage and setter, you gain back your full control. And that's what I'm trying to say. Make sure that you identify where you want to have your control and how much control you have. This is hatchery. Believe it or not, this is hatchery. You see the two dotted lines that are the walls of the hatchery. Your eggs are coming in on the left side in the storage room. You're setting the eggs on the trays, or they are on the farm already set on the trays. You put them in the setter. You transfer them after 18 days. You put them in the hatcher. You bring them after 3 days to take off. You process your chicks. You store your chicks for a while, and then you bring them outside and bring them to the transportation, to the farm. And of course, you produce waste as well. You produce waste at transfer, you clear eggs and your dead embryos. You produce waste that you take off, your shells and your dead embryos, your dead chicks. And processing, you produce waste, you have your second grade chicks that you do not like to deliver, and so on. So there are a couple of moments where you are producing waste. And also you have return flows. What do I mean with that? If I look at the egg trays, the incubator trays, you set your eggs on the trays, you bring them to the setter on the trolleys, you transfer them, and then the trays have to go back to the storage room, to the setting room. Those eggs that have to go back to the setting room, or those trays that go back to the setting room, are almost by definition dirty. So you basically bring from transfer dirty, not dirty in the sense of dirty, but dirty in the sense of not full control. Bring them back in your fresh eggs, your new eggs that are just arrived from that beautiful, clean farm where you had no problem. Also, from your takeoff, you have transferred your eggs, you put them in the baskets, you bring the basket to the hatcher, you hatch them, you take off the chicks, and the baskets are brought back into the transfer room to have a new set of chicks, of eggs being hatching in the hatches. So also there you go back from dirty to relatively clean. Also when you transport chicks, especially what nowadays we transport a lot of tail chicks in hatcher baskets, or not a lot, but quite often, you can see that in the transport chicks, they have to, if they are transported in hatching baskets, basically we have to bring them back to the transport also. And that's what I mean. Those flows is what you have to consider. Those flows from clean to dirty. How does it work out? You want to have your eggs as clean as possible in the setter. So you disinfect them perhaps between the storage, between the setting and the setter. That makes your storage room a dirty room. So everybody that works there should be considered to be a dirty, a risk person, and should not mix with the people in the setter room. And the setter room people should not go back to the storage room because they are potentially a dirty area, if that's what you want to achieve, if that's how you want to approach it. At transfer, you change from more or less clean to more or less dirty, and